So, Kate, thank you so much for chatting to me today. First of all, how did you get into the wine trade?
It's a really good question, Elliot. I like to say that I'm a fifth generation wine drinker. My parents were really into wine growing up, and all kinds of wine, not just collecting, but just wine was at every single meal. And having grown up in Europe, so I grew up in London and also in the Auvergne region of the Loire in France. I was offered wine as a young child to try to enjoy, a thimble with water, and it's always been around. And so it just sort of was second nature that I loved wine. And then my business partner, Tom, and I were actually living in the Midwest in 2008 and 2009. And he was going to business school there. And we together wrote a business plan to start a winery and submitted that business plan to the business plan competition. It was like what you had to do in order to graduate, basically. Sure. And the business plan did really, really well. It came in second place, with actually the caveat that the return on investment wasn't high enough or fast enough, which I can completely agree.
It's the wine industry, right? Like
in general, I'm like, true.
Yeah, you're right.
10 years in, true. But what happened at that time is the economy crashed. I think that everyone can remember the Great Recession that happened here in the US. And we looked around, and Tom was actually in banking, and that's where he was going ahead. And I was an event planner, and we were like, we're not going to have jobs. This is not going to happen. The recession would mean that both of our sectors were completely cut. So we took a little bit of savings and a lot of good faith from my parents. They let us stay at our home in the Auvergne. And we went to learn how to make wine in the Beaujolais, actually, is where we went to our schooling. And then we worked in Auvergne for a year. So that's how we got into it.
Amazing. And then how did you settle in Portland? Mm-hmm. So, or the Willamette Valley? Which came first? Was it like, this is a great city, or this is a great place to produce wine? How did you end up where you are now?
So it kind of came in tangents at the same time. So right at the end, I would say what's really interesting is that my dad is who introduced me to Oregon wine when we were actually living in Switzerland in 1988, 1989. It's when the first wines were produced in Oregon by Domaine Drouin, which is obviously a very famous Burgundy house, but they had purchased land in Oregon for the first time and had been producing and had started exporting it. So Oregon wine had always sort of been around for me also. My dad was enamored with it. He thought that for the New World, that it produced beautiful wines. He's not wrong. Still not wrong. And when we had decided to start to make wine, we looked at California. We'd actually been living in California in San Francisco, and we looked around, and I think just climate-wise in terms of temperature and also in terms of the immense popularity of California wines at the time, there was no access for young winemakers, or there was, but very little. It was already a pretty saturated market. And then we looked at Oregon and we looked at Portland, which is where our winery is now. And everything about it seemed right. So the climate in terms of the weather and also in terms of the people and also just the attitude towards food and wine and things that are new and growing. Oregon seemed like the perfect spot to make the wines that we love and also really fit with the varieties that we were interested in growing and making. So
it seems like there's very little barrier to entry. It's like if you can dream it, you can be it, kind of in Oregon and Portland in general. And so
yeah, for sure, it's still the Wild West out here. Yeah. So
did you always have in your mind, like obviously growing up in the Auvergne, Gamay is the dominant grape variety there, did you always have in your mind that those were the kind of grape varieties you wanted to start working with when you were making your own wines?
So we first started in 2010. It was our first vintage, and we started with Chardonnay and Pinot, and that's what's classic in Oregon. Yeah. These are the grapes, especially Pinot Noir, that really built the reputation of the region. And Chardonnay has become very, very important to the region also, especially in the last 10 years. I didn't expect to see Gamay when I got here, but I love Gamay. Gamay is the variety that I drink every day. I mean, it's my favorite. And it was actually just by chance that when we arrived and we were looking for jobs, I got a job working on the hospitality side of a larger winery. There weren't very many jobs when we got here. In Oregon, there aren't very many jobs. It's still pretty much a big joke that young people come to retire here. But Tom managed to get a job being the assistant winemaker for a medium-sized winery. And in exchange, Tom and I could make our wines there. And so the first vintage that we were making, we had planned to get Pinot and Chardonnay. We had that all in the bag for, and making a little bit of rosé out of Pinot also. But what we realized when we were at this winery is that the acre planted right to the west of the winery facility was Gamay. And we were like, what is this doing here? And funny enough, like most places in Oregon, and Oregon is interesting, and you know, the history is really short. We've been planted for just around 60 years now, is that people planted a lot of different things and then continue to plant a lot of different things when they were mostly planting Pinot and Chardonnay, but in very, very small amounts, because they were really curious about what could grow here. And so this little bit of Gamay was planted, and I don't think that they were doing much with the Gamay. I think that it was under the 10% and 5% rule. So it was probably getting blended away into some of their lower level Pinot bottlings. Yeah. And we're like, can we have that? Can we buy that next year? And they're like, sure, take it. No problem. Take it away. But what was interesting also is when we did come to visit Oregon for the first time, there's always these comparisons between Burgundy and Oregon in terms of styles of wines, but it actually looks like the Auvergne. When you're here, there's volcanoes and red volcanic soil, and it amazingly has this, it plays between both regions for me. So after seeing the Gamay, looking around, it was like, no, electric bulb, like this makes sense. And Gamay has continued to grow in popularity here. It is incredible. It is being planted like wildfire. It's excellent. We're so excited for the future of Gamay. Yeah. So.
That's great. I think it's always interesting with New World regions as to what the people in the region want the region to be, and then what it actually is best for doing. And I think there's, over the last sort of few years, there's been this big shift to, we want that. And I guess the feeling is we want Oregon to be that Pinot Noir and Chardonnay culture because it fits quite nicely. But what is its true strength? And I think that sounds like it's trying to find
it's still
what it's suited to better. Yeah, it's still trying to find what it's good.
It's still trying to find it. And I think that that's actually very unique to our region in that we are actually so close in time to the original planters and pioneers that we're still able to keep that spirit going, that it's not strange to say, hey, we shouldn't maybe rest our laurels on these one or two varieties. There's way more options out there. And no one's standing there saying you're wrong, you know. It's very open still, and there's still enough energy and youthfulness to the region that people are open-minded about what it is that will grow well here, while still saying, you know, Pinot does grow well here. We do know that. That's established. It is king, but it doesn't mean that there can't be a bunch of princes, you know. So that's continuing.
So how many cuvées would you make in an average year? And do you experiment every year at something different completely?
Are you talking about just Gamay, or are you talking about everything?
No. Well, I guess, yeah, everything. Cuvées.
So bottlings in general, we averaged around 27 different bottlings a year. And we'll be making for this vintage just around 7,000 cases. And that's 12 bottle cases in the US is how we count them. So you imagine there's a few that are larger, but then we have a lot of very small, so 50 to 100 case, either single vineyards or blends or just fun wines, some sparkling wines, constantly experimenting, because that's the joy in my job. The joy is getting to know a place in the world and being able to make a beautiful bottling out of it each year, but then also being able to experiment with a different place or that same place and finding different expressions. And I think that's something maybe that's great about my generation of winemaking too, is that, and where I get to make wine, is that this is encouraged, and people seem to love it. They seem to want to be really interested in the experiments that we make.
Nice. And actually thinking literally where you get to make wine, as you share your cellar space with a few other winemakers as well, which of course is very much in the Portland spirit. So how many of those would you see sort of come through every vintage as well?
So the Southeast Wine Collective, which you're referring to, is our winery, and so Tom and I are the owners, and we make our wine there. But it's also an incubator for up and coming wine brands. And I would say at its peak, we were seeing 20 to 25 different varieties of grapes coming through the door. So the possibilities of combinations are endless. And it teaches you so much. You know, there's no such thing as like a cellar palate for us. There's no, you know, we don't have a fatigue of just one kind of thing that we're trying all the time. There's so much to be tried. And that's very Pacific Northwest too. These regions that we have here that are relatively close for us. I mean, when you talk about them in UK standards, a 6-hour drive is far, but in the US, that's nothing. So, so we're looking at, you know, vineyards that are 4 or 5, 6 hours away that we're working with. And the climates and aspects are so different that they're allowing us to play with all different kinds of grapes at different maturities, but making them all in one spot. It's really cool.
Nice. I think it's interesting to think what you envisage, obviously having the experience, having lived in France, worked in France, and how you see the region yourself compared to how you think the world sees your region. What do you think? So what instrument does it play in the large orchestra of the wine world? Internally, it might be very different to a restaurant down the road that they know to be Oregon wine, and actually moving to the UK, what we see as being Oregon wine. I think the two are very different. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that when you think about Oregon wine, globally, you think about Pinot Noir. And I think that people have done a really, really good job of willing that. But I think that the next story that we need to start to tell is the different regions of Oregon.
Sure.
And the Willamette Valley is so different from the Rogue Valley, is so different from the Umpqua, is so different from the Gorge. And when you're closer to home, you're able to sort of delve more into those intricacies of what Oregon is as a brand and how differentiated it actually is. And that is our next job. And it's actually something that I talk about with my peers and all the time, is that we need to do a better job of expanding what it is that Oregon is known for, because the Willamette Valley is really known for Pinot mostly. Yeah. And yes, a fair amount is grown in Southern Oregon too, but that's not the whole story. So yes, I'm really happy. We've obviously, you know, made a mark somewhere and people are like, oh yes, I've heard of you. But they don't know the whole story yet. But that's an exciting thing for being a young winemaker, is the story has yet to be fully told.
I certainly think that a lot of people from outside of perhaps the US or perhaps even outside Oregon see Oregon as actually just the Willamette Valley. It's a little bit like when you hear Americans say, "Oh, you're from London," when actually from the whole of the UK, and it's the same misconception happens both ways.
And they ask you if you know John, and you're like,
yeah,
no,
exactly.
I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, no.
Well, I might do, but there's few.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But yes, I think that there's just there's still so much of a story to be told, and that is a testament to the youth of the region, but also to the potential. You know, and I couldn't imagine a better place to make wine and to be part of that story. It's really, really an opportunity for Tom and for me. So,
well, on that note, and it probably is a silly question, I probably already know the answer, is where else in the world would you be making wine if it wasn't in Oregon or downtown Portland?
it's really, that's a really difficult question, because I am so curious. And I think that like a lot of people, that it's hard to pick something that's your favorite. I mean, of course, I do love the Beaujolais. And I would really love to go back to the Auvergne. I haven't been able to travel. So, and a dream maybe to make wine there one day. But these past couple of years, I've been obsessed with the Jura. So that would be something I'd be interested in too. Or maybe just keep traveling and make wine everywhere.
Make wine everywhere. Yeah,
that sounds great too.
But it is funny though, because people who make certain styles of wine and like making that certain style of wine might think immediately to the French example of that style. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's quite restrictive. There's no way you could have as much fun with 25 different cuvées if you worked in Fleury and had only vineyards in Fleury. There's only so many cuvées you can make of Fleury, let's say.
Yeah. I get asked this all the time, you know, why I didn't stay in France, because I do have the opportunity to. I have a European passport. I have a British passport too. So it would have been an option for me. But having watched some of the French winemakers struggle through the change in the AOCs and being able declassifying of wines and sort of that whole movement. And I lived and worked in France right before there was a really big younger push of wines, of people being like, you know what, to hell with this, I'm going to make the wines I want to make. I really watched winemakers I loved struggle at being kept within these boxes. And I realized that while America has plenty of faults, we certainly don't have as many rules when it comes to things that we can try when it comes to wine and make. And certainly a lot of the rules are based, of course, on quality, but they're not restrictive in terms of what can actually be in the bottle. And that seemed like a beautiful opportunity for us, you know, more of what it seemed like a great launching point. And so that's why I make wine in America.
I think there's no such thing as a box in Oregon, though, is there?
No, exactly. You can make whatever you want. I mean, certainly there's rules about what you can put on the label and that you have to disclose what you're making.
Honesty. Just be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, transparency is important. Yeah. But you can make whatever. There's no one's telling you what you can or can't do. So.
Yeah. So in making wine, especially in the sort of the size of which you do, there's a number of different roles that the winemaker, well, you play as the winemaker or business owner. What's your favorite? Which do you thrive on the most?
You know what? It's the most interdisciplinary job that I have ever imagined. And it's something you don't realize going into it, that you are not only like the electrician, but you're also the chemist. And then you're also the sales manager,
the farmer, the weeder,
everything. And you're the person that puts everything to bed at night and turns off the lights and locks it up. It's incredible. It's across every single aspect of every job that I've ever had or could imagine. And I would say that, we just got done with harvest. And so I'm on a big harvest high. I love
or low, just slumping. Yeah.
Slumping. I actually feel pretty good. We're doing our last press offs on Wednesday.
Nice.
We have Nebbiolo and my Syrah that has been post macerating for 45 days now. Wow. So, and then we're actually putting pet nats into bottle tomorrow. Cool. So we're still pushing and trying to get through to the finish line here. I love winemaking. Like I really, really love coming in every single day and seeing where those grapes have gone.
Creating.
And their journey and the translation of the vintage. And then and that winemaking starts really, it starts in the vineyard, of course, and then right through when I get to do blending, starting in the spring. Being able to bring all of those aspects together into something that is delicious, and that I think will make people smile. That is that's the best job on earth, Yeah.
Well, making people smile is the best job on earth. However you do it, it's quite fun.
Exactly.
So growing up or making wine, was there ever a year or a vintage or a wine you've drunk that really stuck in your mind? Be a vintage good or bad, or wine good or bad, that really has a sort of a bookmark in your in your wine experience?
Yeah, it's the bottle of wine that actually made me say yes to Oregon. Tom and I had been traveling between Europe and the US when we were studying, and afterwards truly trying to decide on what we wanted to do with our lives. And we had been in Oregon for a little bit of time, sort of meeting people and drinking wine and taking a look. And this is 2009, so this is 11 years ago. And Oregon was a much smaller community than it is now. It has grown incredibly in the last few years. But I was sitting down at a restaurant in McMinnville, which is like our central hub of the Willamette Valley. And I had a bottle of Roosevelt Vineyard from Elk Cove. It's made by a gentleman by the name of Adam Campbell, and his family is one of the pioneers, the first families of Oregon wine. And I remember drinking this wine and just being blown away, completely raptured and captured the whole thing, just thinking that it was absolutely beautiful and unique, and that it held such potential. And at that moment I was like, yes, I think this is it. This is where I want to make wine.
The deal.
So,
very nice.
Sweet story though, is that I got drunk one night and told Adam this story. and of course he's like, you know, he's in his 50s and he's like nodding at me like, sure, whatever. But we had him come down to the winery one day to do a tasting with us. And he's always been really nice to us. He's one of the people that's always encouraged Tom and I to do what we do. And he went to leave and he's like, I left you a gift on the bar. And I was like, thanks, Adam. And I went in to take a look and it was that same bottle.
Wow.
So, isn't that amazing?
So he was listening. He was listening.
Maybe it was me feeling awkward waking up the next morning hungover being like, what did I say?
I just met my idol. Like,
exactly. I fangirled real hard.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what shit. But yeah, so he had left me a bottle of that wine. Nice. So, and just this knowing that you're in the right place, you know, that bottle really let me know that I had come home.
But I also guess that the attitude of him leaving your bottle, helping out in the winery, just encapsulates the whole thing as well. It all brings it full circle to say, I'm in the right place. This collaborative nature of creation that we're endorsing here is, love it.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful thing about where we make wine, and that's what wine's all about. It's about community. It's about bringing people together. It's about sharing differences or finding the same notes. You know, that's wine in a bottle right there.
Brilliant. Kate, thank you so much for chatting. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you as always. Really nice. Thank you so much.
It's wonderful to spend time with you, Elliot. Nice mustache.
Thanks so much.